Hashem. This is the Daf Yomi for Shabbos that we're recording on Friday afternoon, and so we're going to start on Samach Beis Amud Aleph, 8 lines from the top. Daf Yomi is Samach Beis 62. We're going to start on Samach Beis Amud Aleph, 8 lines from the top. The Gemara says, okay, when they came back during the return in the time of Ezra, then how do they recognize where to put the Mizbeach, where to put the altar? Bishlama, it makes sense. Bias, Minkara, Tzura. So it makes sense how they could recognize where to put the base of Mikdash, because you can remember the form. You have the base of the walls were still there. Elam is Beach, but the altar, Mina Yadi. How they know where to put the altar? So I'm Rabbi Elazar. Ra'um is Beach Banoi. So we have a few answers to this question. First is Rabbi Elazar, that they saw an altar that was built up in heaven. I mean, theoretically, from the text of the Gemara, it could be that they saw like a virtual altar in that spot. And the commentaries understand to mean that there was an altar up in heaven that was directly opposite this altar, and they saw the angel Michael serving on that altar, and so they knew to make it directly opposite that. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka Amar, he gives the second answer, Afro Shal Yitzchak Ro. They saw the ashes of Yitzchak that were piled up there, and since Yitzchak was the Akedah was on the Mizbeach, they knew it was right there. Commentaries say it wasn't the ashes of Yitzchak, but it was the ashes of the ram that was brought in place of Yitzchak. That's what Rabbi Yaakov Emner says, but technically it just says the ashes of Yitzchak, Ro Shemunach Bo Samakim, so that they were placed in that spot. And the third answer is from Rishmal Bar Nachmani. He says, Mikol Abayis Kul Erichu Reach Ketoras, from the whole temple, and they were smelling the smell of the incense. Misham Erichu Reach Haivarim, but in the place of the altar, it smelled like the smell of the limbs, and that's what they smelled there. So Amar Rav Baruch Hanan Rabbi Yochanan Shlosha Neviim Olimayim and Agola, 3 prophets went up with them from the diaspora. Their names were Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi. One who prophesied to them where the altar would be, meaning to say that you could add on to the space and make it up to 60 amos, as we saw in yesterday's daf. One who testified to them about the place of the altar, where it was supposed to be. And one who testified for them that you bring an offering even though there's no temple anymore, because the sanctity of the base of Mikdash was sanctified forever. From the second approach, it says that he had to tell them where the altar would be, because you needed a prophet. If you were doing the law and you forgot to do it, then you need a prophet to tell you how to reintroduce it. That's what the Briskers say. Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov Omer, Shlosh Neviim Awolim and Agola. So it was taught that there were 3 prophets that went up from them to go. Echad Shem Lam Mizbeach, one testified about the altar, Al Makom Mizbeach, and the place of the altar. Echad Shehelem Shemakrimin Al Picha in Bayis. One testified that they bring it even though there's no temple. And then the third one, Echad Shehelem Al Torah Shetichtav Shetikasev Ashuris. And the third one testified for them that the Torah, originally it was given to them in the Ksav Ivri, and now it was being told to them but now they could write it in the Ksav of Ashuris, which is a different Ksav. So Tana Rabbanan, the Brisa tells us, Karen, the horns of the altar, V'kevesh, the ram, V'yesod, the base, V'ribua, and the fact that it's square, Ma'akvin. This is all essential. If you don't have any of those things, the altar is disqualified. Midas arko, midas rakbo, midas kamoso. The measurement of its length, its width, its height, ein ma'akvin. Those are not essential. So the exact size is not essential, but these other aspects are essential. What's its source? It says in the verse, Al karnos hamizbeach, on the altar. Kol makom shenemar hamizbeach. Wherever it says hamizbeach, that is la'akev. That's to say it's required. Well, if that's the case, al me'ata kior l'Rebbe v'sovev l'Rebbe Yossi. What's the kior? Kior, Rashi says these are the forms that were on the altar around the middle part of it. This is called not the kior as in the basin, but the kior, these drawings that were on it. So these are the designs. So Hachinami, do you want to say that those are also required? You shall place it under the karkov of the mizbeach below it. Vitanya Ezu Karkov. What is a Karkov? Rabbi Yehuda Omer Zekir. These are the designs. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Zasov. This is the ledge. So since the Hamizbeach is used with respect to the Karkov, so maybe these designs are also required. Gemara says yeah, they're required. Vitanya, because we learned also ayon nifgamal karen hamizbeach. That day the mizbeach was damaged. What's that day? What day is that? So that we know that there was. This is the Gemara in Sukkah Memchas tells us that there was a day that the Kohanim were supposed to do a water libation on Sukkot, but one day a Tzeduki didn't want to do that, so he poured it out his feet and set onto the mizbeach, and everybody was throwing their esrogim at him, and they damaged the altar. Maybe Vul Shel Melach, and they brought they brought a fist of salt, and they fixed up the damage. Not because that would make it kosher, because that just covered up the mistake. It didn't fix it. So you wouldn't see the altar damage. Any altar that doesn't have the horn, the ramp, the base, or square is disqualified. Or Rabbi Huda says afa sovev, also the sovev. But anyway, we see that the karkov, which is according to Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, is the ledge, is invalid if it doesn't have it. So therefore, if Rabbi says the karkov is the design, that's also going to be required. So the Gemara says, Tana Rabbanan Ezu Karkov. What is the Karkov? Bein Karen with Karen. So one opinion is that it's between the horns. Makom Hilach Raglei Kohanim Amo. That it's an Amma wide area of the Kohanim where they could walk. So Atu Kohanim Ben Karen with Karen. Did the Kohanim walk between the horns? They couldn't walk between the horns. The horns would stop them. Ela Ema Umakom Hilach Raglei Kohanim Amma. So read it, and the area where the Kohanim walk was an Amma. So the Karkov is the area between the horns and the area where the Kohanim walked. So it was adjacent to the horns. It was like the ledge. So Gemara says, "V'aksiv tachas karkuvom lamata ad chatzio." But we say about the mikbar, or the lattice, it's below the karkov until its midpoint. So we see from here that the karkov was on the side. So I'm not from it's a treya. There were two karkovs. There was one on the side of the mizbeach, which was for decoration, and that was directly on. That's in the Torah, and that's one that's debated by Rabbi and Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Yehuda. So one was the kohanim that was on top of the altar, so that they wouldn't slip. This was indented into the upper area of the mizbeach and was surrounded by a rim to prevent the kohanim from falling off. Okay, so where it says midas arko, midas rachbo, midas kamaso ein ma'af. The length and the width and the height they're not essential. I'm a Rabbi Mani. So Rabbi Mani said, as long as it's not smaller than the mizbeach that Moshe made. The Kama, how much was the mizbeach that Moshe made? Rav Yosef Amma, it was 1 Amma square. So so they laughed at him. It says that the mizbeach should be 5 amos long and 5 amos wide. It was square. What are you talking about? It's 1 amma. So Amarle Abaye. So Abaye said to Rav Yosef, because we know Rav Yosef forgot all his teachings. So he says, Dilma makom ma'aracha kamar. Maybe you mean to say that the fire was 1 amma. The space of the fire was 1 amma by 1 amma. Amarle, yeah, that's exactly what I meant to say. He said, Mar de Gavra Rabba Yada my Kamina. He said, you're a great man, so you knew what I meant, that I was only referring to the place of the fire. Kari Alayu, he called them B'nai Keturah, which is a reference to this week's parasha. He called them a reference to this week's parasha. I heard one explanation about this, which was that the Bnei Keturah were the children who were the extra part. They weren't the main fire. Main fire was Isaac. Isaac was the son of Abraham, and the Bnei Keturah were the extra. So too, the main aspect of the altar was the fire, and the extra parts were like the Bnei Keturah. But the simple explanation is that even though the people were laughing at him, descended from Avram, they were children of Keturah and not Sarah. So Bnei Achte to Rabbi Tarfon, Avayasi Kamei to Rabbi Tarfon. The sons of Rabbi Tarfon's sister, i.e. his nephews, were sitting in front of Rabbi Tarfon. Pasach Amar. He started to speak. He said, Vayosef Avram Vayikach Isha Ushmo Yochani. This is again this week's parasha, but he made up a pasuk. It's not a pasuk. He says Avram went and he took another woman whose name was Yochani. There's no such pasuk. The actual pasuk is in our parasha and it says Ushma Keturah. He deliberately misquoted it so that his nephews would speak. Amrway Keturah. They say, what are you talking about? It says Keturah. Karelam B'nai Keturah. So he called them B'nai Keturah, meaning to say, he called them the children of Keturah because they weren't saying anything. They were sleeping, and so he's trying to wake them up. He says, "Oh, well, you know Keturah at least." I mean, this is a deep story. There's a lot to read with it, but it's also relevant to this week's parasha, which talks about the children of Keturah. Amar Abaye bar Huna, Amar Abchama bar Goria, Gezirin Shasa Moshe. The blocks of wood that Moshe made, the Torah required that there would be 2 blocks of wood on the Mizbeach. Each morning, 2 blocks are placed in the morning and 2 blocks in the afternoon. Orkan Amma v'roch ban Amma v'ovyon kamachik godesh sa. They would be 1 amma long, 1 amma wide, and their thickness was like the level used for removing the excess from a seah. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah ba'ama geduma. This is with a short amma. We know there is a long amma which is 6 tfachim, and a short amma is 5 tfachim. So they were a little bit shorter so that the Kohanim could walk. Amar Rav Yosef Lav Hainu Ditanya Al Eitzim Asher Oeis Asher Al Mizbeach Shli Yotzim Min Mizbeach Klum. So Rav Yosef said this was taught in the Brisa. It says on the wood on the fire that's on the altar. What does it mean on the altar? That the wood could not go out from the altar at all. So it's not going to go into the Kohanim's walkway. So it wasn't necessary to make them a smaller amma. Tanan Hasam, Kevesh the ramp was at the southern part of the altar. Orach Shoshim Mushtayim, it was 32 amos long, Arochav Sheshes by 16 amos wide. Benani Mili, how do we know this? Amarav Huna, Amarkov Shachato so Yeracham Mizbeach Tzafoni, you should slaughter it next to the altar on the north. What does that mean? Shia Yerach B'Tzafon, that so to speak, the thigh shall be in the north. Upanav Badaram, and the face will be in the south, i.e. the front in the south. So therefore the ram should be on the southern side. Ema Yarach B'Tzafon, Upanav B'Tzafon, maybe the thigh should be on the north, and also the face in the north. Why do you assume the face is opposite the thigh? Amarava Rami Gavra Ape, put him on his face, and so therefore his legs and his face are on opposite sides. Amroy Adarabba, Taretz for Osif Gavra, sit him up straight. If you sit him up straight, both his face and his feet point in the same direction. Amroy Ravu Aksiv, it's square, and which basically implies lying down. Word Ravua means like to crouch. So therefore, we compare it to a person who's lying down. His feet are in the north and his face is in the south. But don't we need that to teach us that it's literally supposed to be square? Gemara says miksiv miruba. Does it say miruba? No, it's written ravua, which is lying down. Or tamech miksuv ravut. It doesn't say it's crouching. Amarlei ravua ksiv demash me'achal mashmach. So it says ravua means square and also lying down. The Tani Maislei Me'achal, and a different source for this. Rabbi Yehuda Omer u'ma'oseo finos kadim. It says its ram turns eastward. Kol pino shata ponelo yel pone derech mizrach. Wherever you turn, you have to turn to the right, which is to the east. So the ram was supposed to be placed in a way which, when the Kohen would go up and turn right, it will be facing east. That's only if the ramp is on the southern side. Ve'ema smola mizrach. Maybe it means when you turn left, you'll be facing east. You're coming from the opposite direction. Titani Yam Sha'atza Shlomo. Shlomo HaMelech built a huge basin, and that was to be a mikvah for the Kohanim. Omed al Shnei Sar Bakar, Shlosha Ponim Tzafona, Shlosha Ponim Yama, Shlosha Ponim Negro, Shlosha Ponim Mizracha. So it stood on 12 oxen, like they were not real oxen. They were like images of oxen, and 3 turned north, 3 turned west, 3 turned south, 3 turned east. Kol Pino Shatapona Loyu El Derachimin. And that's to teach us that whenever you do something, you have to turn to the right, because it lists it in order of counterclockwise. And so when you're walking with your face, if you're walking sidewise, counterclockwise direction, then you're constantly moving to your right. So we see from here that the way to turn while he's doing is always to the right. So that's based upon the fact that it lists that direction: northwest, south, and then east. Gemara says, no, only Goofy. Don't we need to describe the oxen? Im came ponim lamud. Why did it have to say turned after each time? Shal Rabbi Shimon ben Yossi ben Lakunya asked Rabbi Yossi. Omer Rabbi Shimon Yochai. Avir yesh ben kevesh mizbeach. He said, did Rabbi Shimon Yochai really say that there was a space between the ramp and the altar? He said, don't you agree? So bring your oil offerings, the meat and the blood. So just like the blood is on the altar through throwing, so too the meat is on the altar through throwing, meaning to say they're thrown from the limb, they're thrown from the ramp onto the altar. So there's a gap. I don't mean that he has to stand on the ramp and throw it. I just say that can mean they can stand next to the fire and throw it into the fire. No, when the Kohen throws it into the fire, does he throw it into the part which is burning? Or maybe the part that's not burning. So he throws it to the part which is burning. And because it's impossible otherwise. So for sure. So therefore it's teaching us that there's a gap. It's like the blood. Madam avir karkam afsiko. Just like when you throw the blood onto the altar, there's the ground in between. Also, by the meat, the airspace of the ground is intervening. There are 2 small ramps coming out from the big ram. One of them went down to the base and to the sovev. And they were separated by a hair from the altar. Mishum shenemar saviv. It says saviv. So the altar has to be interrupted all the way around. So you have to have these side ramps coming out. Rabbi Avo Amar Ravua. And no, if the ramps touch the altar, it wouldn't be square. Vitzrach o mechtav saviv, vitzrach o mechtav Ravua. It has to say both saviv Ravua. Di kasser rachmana saviv. It says saviv havmina da'agam nigo. I might have thought you can make it circle, Kasser Rahman Ravua, so it's square. Because Rahman Ravua, if he said it's square, Avamina de Arach V'Kotin, I might have said that make 2 sides long and the other 2 sides short. So Kasser Rahman Saviv, so it says all the way around. Tanan also, we weren't. The ramp and the altar were 62 amos. Mar says, but if you add 32 and 32, you get 64. Ani shitim v'arban over there. That makes 64. Mar says, nimtza pareach amal yisod amal sove. No, it was overlapping. And Amar Rami Bar Chama kol kivshay kivashim shalosh. All the ramps extended 3 amos. The grade was 3 to 1. Except for the altar, shaya shalosh amos and mechza. That's both shlish etzba. It says 3.5 amos and 1 1/3 etzbos was the grade, bizachrusa. And the etzba here is referring to the joint in the middle of the thumb. Okay, this is today's daf, and God willing, we'll do it slower and more carefully in Daf tomorrow. Everybody have a good day. Yesha koach. A good Shabbos.